Well, welcome back, everybody, to our bonus reel. Sorry we ran long on session one, but we have plenty to talk about. So we're going to keep the conversation going here, talking about the smart manufacturing truth table, and if there is truth in smart manufacturing. If you remember from the first session, we talked about the need to lay out for all of us definitions, imperatives, things that have meaning that will actually define what smart manufacturing is. And as we've laid out, and we'll discuss here now in this session, we've laid out 7 areas where we believe that they all need to be true. And if we are able to do so, then we would meet the definition of something meeting our definition of smart manufacturing. So what we wanted to do is jump through and spend a little bit of time here with everybody to sort of poke at what would happen if you were able to do most of these, but not all of these situations. So just taking the one at the top, obviously security is an imperative, to say the least. Nobody's going to start down the path of adopting technologies and putting them in place if they are not confident that they can do it securely. So obviously doing such a thing would be risky for your business. Conrad, you want to talk a little bit about the depth behind these? Obviously this is high level.
So even though the truth table is about zeros and ones, we really want you to think of low and high. And so obviously, if you don't address security at all, you're really opening up yourself for a lot of trouble. But we, behind these imperatives, are going to have a lot more detail about that, because there's a lot of security, for example, that we can do beyond just isolating the plant and putting a DMZ in place to separate suppliers and open a little hole in there. I mean, we really need strategies that allow us to do all of these things. So when we're talking about security, it has to still enable us the connectivity into the whole value chain, the connectivity of the plant into our enterprise and the whole value chain. So we get into the more detail of what it means to be high in each one of these categories. A high rank in that category means that you have more modern ways to go after threat intelligence, after tactics like adaptive intruder diversion, autonomous healing. So there's a lot more meat. We can't go into each one of those that way today, right. But I want you to know that we're not just saying low and high, that we're going to be more specific at what it means to have a high ranking in each one of these or a low ranking. And what we want to stress today is that in this truth table, so what happens if you have a low ranking in one of these areas? What is the biggest consequence of that?
Well, I think you just want to show everybody that you're a lot smarter than I am. That's why you're talking about all this cybersecurity stuff. So I would point everybody to our last session where we had the Cybersecurity Institute from Carnegie Mellon on with us, and the folks from SciLab. But yeah.
I just have it fresh because we just had that webcast. But if you want more on that, we definitely have that recorded.
Yep, exactly. So Conrad, talk a little bit. Let's take a little bit of depth here to talk about what do we mean when we talk about flat, real time. What does that mean from a smart manufacturing perspective?
Yeah, well, so we always say we want real time, and that it's a real game changer, because we are used to collecting data in a hierarchical system, and we were only doing real time really close to the control layer at the machine layer, where we needed that kind of low latency, and we need to do things in milliseconds. But what we mean by real time, and which is actually and sometimes near real time, is that we're event driven, and as things are happening, we are reacting to them closer to real time. We're not acting with batch data that is, batch to the day or the week. We're not just working to weekly reports. And what does that mean? It's not not about just that I can pull up a report and I'm looking at real-time data. It means that there's a reason why you're doing that. So you can enable a different kind of organization, a flat organization, where it doesn't take days to make a decision because things have to go up every tier of the management structure and across departments, where we can delegate decisions locally and
Yep.
work as a flatter organization.
And locally could be down to whatever granular level people want it to be, right? So down to the operator level. We've talked before that I know there's a small manufacturer in the region not far from where I live that is actually sharing real-time payment information, profitability information on the orders that the operators are working on with the operators, so they know how they can drive up their pay on a project. I mean, literally on an order by order basis. Right, they're making that information visible. So that's one thing from a technology perspective. But the other point about the flat organization is they are putting that information in front of those workers so that they can make decisions in real time, as opposed to waiting or going and asking somebody else to make those decisions. So I think it's a great
and I would say it would be just as important, the review of the organizational structure.
Yep.
Along with the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure is just as important. If we don't implement information systems and newer systems to change and make the organization more efficient.
Part of the broader conversation that we're helping drive, even through your efforts from an EWD perspective, and how education, workforce development, if people didn't catch that, but how we're educating people and how we're working with other parts of the business, HR, and how we're compensating people, how we're incentivizing people, et cetera. So let's keep moving here, Conrad. Let's talk open and interoperable. We say if that's not happening, you're stuck with information silos. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it used to be that if you want to get information about the plant, you had to walk the plant, look at each of the whiteboards in the hallways, and each department has their own charts and posted, and that data is very localized there, right? And forget about one plant seeing into the other plant. I mean, you had to actually go over there, and each one might have a different way to look at metrics. So the meaning of a metric over there is over here is different. So being interoperable is yes, we want the data connected and we want the integrations, but we want them to be open. We want to be standardized. We want to make a plug and play easier. We want it to be multi-vendor. There's a lot in each one of these imperatives. But if you don't do them, so if you're not interoperable, if you cannot exchange data readily, you end up with silos of information. You implement systems, and that data of that system is mostly in that system, so you have to go to that system to find out about, your asset. You need to go to another system to find out how you're doing with quality.
Yeah, and I'd say, this is right in the sweet spot of CESMII's Smart Manufacturing Innovation Platform, right? So if you go look at the recording online that we have about the demo, the integrated demo that's at our Innovation Center satellite down at North Carolina State University, it shows different applications that are using the same data infrastructure to drive specific value in their area of operations. And that's a bunch of different applications that are able to leverage and interoperate because of the technology infrastructure that CESMII's putting into place there. So can't state enough how important that is from personal experience, and then obviously
picked on one thing and put information out, but there's all kinds of manual inefficiencies and errors, errors that goes with data being transmitted and handled manually versus automated. So there's even more consequences than these. We're just picking on some that might resonate the most, but and this is also in flux. We might end up saying that the error part of this, the manual error part of this, is more important than the information silo part of this, but
Right.
or listing maybe a few for each.
So let's move on, talk about scalability, right? So we've talked forever, and I know our CEO at CESMII has been quoted in articles written late last year about the Institute's efforts to end pilot purgatory, and that certainly fits into a category of scaling out a solution from its initial states, or initial state, to broad scale adoption. So from a scalability perspective, it seems to make sense that if we can build it in one place, that we can reuse it, we can scale it, and see value much more broadly from that. But go a little deeper on the how you're framing up the definition, how we're adding depth to that area.
Well, there's different dimensions of scale. So there's we want to be able to scale in cost, performance, and reach. So, and one of the things to keep in mind for me that I like to keep in mind for scalability is that the normal growth pattern is that as for cost and performance is that as things get more complex, as things get larger, the cost and performance go up exponentially, or poor performance and cost go up exponentially. And what we want to do is, through disruptive strategies, we want to make that linear. To democratize and scale, we need that cost goes up more linearly in proportion to when you keep adding facilities, that there's a more of a linear cost, that the cost doesn't go up exponentially.
Yeah, and definitely we've talked about that, lived through it, and certainly it's one of the main themes that we drive within the Institute, that the expectation is always engineer the first system, and then the second, third, fourth, fifth will get less and less expensive, and that hasn't been the case in our industry, right? That we haven't seen that dramatic decline. So to your point on the cost and affordability, right, the repurposing, that absolutely is a key element. So talk to us about proactive, semi-automatic. What are you talking about there, or semi-automated?
Well, that so we want to go from reactive and diagnostics to predictive and prescriptive, but an important part of that, moving to more proactive intelligence, is the semi-autonomous point of view, that the smart factory is not just about fully automating things and lights out factories, that it's about creating predictions and prescriptions that human can act on, human in the loop, because we might delegate the routine, and we want to the machine, to machine learning algorithms and stuff. If something's routine decisions, okay, but the real smart aspect of this is when we get into when we are recommending suggestions and bringing the human into the loop to act faster on things, but with more information at their fingertips.
Right. Yep, I agree with that completely. So let's talk more about how you limit your opportunities. If and this is, I think, kind of where we ended the original session. You were talking about resilience and orchestrated capabilities. So why don't you pick up where that conversation left off?
Yeah, we were talking about how resiliency is an important aspect of what you're looking for in a good partner, in a good supply chain partner, and you want those partners to also be part of a synchronized, orchestrated value chain. So, and if you don't rank well in these areas, you're going to have limited partnering opportunities. So it's important that all of these things, there's a lot of relationship between this whole being real time, interoperable,
Right.
scalable. But this particular item here is stressing how important it is that you're an important node in this network of the value chain, and you need to be a valuable partner.
And this, I mean, to me, this screams out, right? We've been talking, excuse me, we've been talking for decades about, matching production with demand, right? We've been talking about manufacturing agility. So this is part of the same old discussion we've been having for a long time, right? The information to make real-time informed decision, et cetera. And that's why it fits into this conversation that it needs to be part of the and story, right? That you need to do the things that you just outlined, right? We're not changing what we've been trying to do for some time, but we're ensuring that in order for it to scale, in order it to be secure, in order for it to be smart, it needs to do these other things as well. And so I think that's a perfect proof point to say, yeah, well, this isn't a brand new change. This is an extension, a continuation. It's the next generation of thinking and how we run our manufacturing businesses. And so that's why it's driving toward a new definition.
Yeah, and the next part of moving to the next generation is to move beyond the static buffers and static lead times that drive these schedules that we put in place. And this is how we plan out the whole few months of production and supply chain and with fixed inventory buffers. We need to move to more of a rules base that reacts to demand. So it's not just a demand signal, but it's a little smarter than that, and getting ahead of patterns and really reacting to the reality. So if we have a swarm on some product, hot new product, and the demand ends up being higher than we thought, then how does that whole value chain react to it? Is it connected in a way that can respond to it in a very effective way?
Yeah, and I think, just a few weeks ago, the CESMII CEO was on a congressional briefing Congress on changes to supply chain. So I think what we're living through right now with the global pandemic and the impact that that's had on supply chains is a perfect illustration of how resilient and orchestrated we need we need to be a part. So everybody that's part of that value chain needs to themselves be resilient and part of that. So why don't you hit us on the last point here, right? We don't want to waste resources. So from a sustainability perspective, sustainable manufacturing, what are we thinking about here?
Well, I think some of the ideas here is that we move from cradle to grave thinking to a more circular product life cycle thinking, right? That we think about what happens to a product after its end of life and how that is more efficient and less wasteful. And that we think about energy usage, not just as overhead costs, as a given. We need to operate all this equipment and run the plant, but that we actually manage energy in the bill of material as part of the recipe, as part of the bill of material, and we try to optimize that ingredient of energy in our bill of material. So I think how we treat the sustainability dimension is also an important part of the smart manufacturing imperative.
Right. Well, and I would say, first of all, we spent a good bit of time today talking about where we are with this truth table. We talked in the previous session about how important what the need is to have a definition of truth. And I think that, from my perspective, we don't need, one of the reasons that I'm so staunchly advocating that we have a new definition, even though it's common language, right? Smart manufacturing is a very plain, set of words. but it needs to mean something different, right? One of my pet peeves, if we talked about Conrad preparing for today, was that, when somebody solves yesterday's problem using a new technology, that doesn't get me excited, right? Just because we now have, smarter tools with IP addresses, that's not game changing to me, right? What we're doing with those and how they interoperate across this entire spectrum to help drive value, to help people solve problems that are coming down the road that we don't even know about yet. I mean, that's what smart manufacturing has to be about, right? That it has to be about solving tomorrow's problems before we even know what the heck they are. So that's why I'm such a staunch believer that we need some new meaning behind the phrase, the definition of smart manufacturing, and why we've started this work. But I guess anything from your perspective to close us out here.
Well, just a reminder that we said that, there's the draft label up there. We want to converge on this and put something, at least a version 1 out of this material pretty soon. But a call out to, if you want to contribute to this work, if you want to be a reviewer on this work, please reach out to us. Mike will put our emails out there again, so that you know where to reach us. But that's an important part of this conversation.
Sorry about that. I was trying to back up and show our email addresses. That didn't work, but it's
well, it'll be on the website for sure, and it was
Yep.
in the other reel.
It is on, yes, it is on session 1, so you have to watch all 20 minutes of that to get
Conrad.Leyva@CESMII.org.
and Mike.Yost@CESMII.org. All right, that's all I got. You good?
I'm good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.